Hello everybody, and welcome back to the Sonata playthrough. It is time to enter Mount Rock and begin the final stretch of Chapter 6, Tristesse. And I mean, we are going to be here for quite a while because we're going to be doing a lot of levelling up throughout this dungeon. But by the end of the next part, we will have finished Chapter 6, and the end of the game will be so very close, apart from, you know, the fact of the final dungeons taking frickin' forever. But you get the gist. So, since we are basically just gonna get a ridiculous amount of cutscening, well, not necessarily a ridiculous amount of cutscening, a ridiculous amount of preparation and battling taking place through this, I thought that now was perhaps a good time, I suppose, to go into Chopin's life in general. Well, not necessarily in general, but basically the arc of his life, because obviously we've seen specific moments in terms of the musical pieces selected in the game and their description of events that took place. But that doesn't necessarily cover everything about Chopin, and since, you know, we're here for a good 37 odd minutes going through this dungeon, we might as well. So, Frédéric Chopin was born in Zależowa Wola, 29 miles west of Warsaw, in what was then the Duchy of Warsaw, which was a Polish state established by Napoleon. The parish baptismal record gives his birthday as the 22nd of February 1810, and cites his given names in the Latin Friderikus Franciscus. So, in Polish he was Fryderyk Franciszek, Zek, or whatever. But the composer and his family used the birth date 1st of March, which is now generally accepted as the correct date. His father, Nicholas Chopin, was a Frenchman from Lorraine who had emigrated to Poland in 1787 at the age of 16. He tutored his children... so Nicholas tutored children of the Polish aristocracy, and in 1806 married Justyna Krzanskała, or Krzanowska, that's probably a bit more accurate, a poor relative of the Skarbecks, one of the families for whom he worked. Frederick was baptised on Easter Sunday, 23rd of April 1810, in the same church where his parents had married in Brochow. His 18-year-old godfather, for whom he was named, was Frederick Skarbeck, a pupil of Nicholas Chopin. Frederick was the couple's second child and only son. He had an elder sister, Ludwika, and two younger sisters, Isabella and Emilia. Nicholas was devoted to his adopted homeland and insisted on the use of the Polish language in the household. In October 1810, 6 months after Frederick's birth, the family moved to Warsaw, where his father had acquired a post teaching French at the Warsaw Lyceum, then housed in the Saxon Palace. Frederick lived with his family in the palace grounds. His father played the flute and violin, and his mother played the piano and gave lessons to the boys in the boarding house that the Chopins kept. And Chopin was of slight build, and even in early childhood was prone to illnesses that would continue throughout his life. Frederick may have had some piano instruction from his mother, but his first professional music tutor from 1816 to 1821 was the Czech pianist Wojciech Zuni, I think. His elder sister, Ludwika, also took lessons from Zuni, and occasionally played duets with her brother. It quickly became apparent that he was a child prodigy, because by the age of 7, Frederick had begun giving public concerts, and in 1817, he composed 2 polonaises in G minor and B flat major. His next work, a polonaise in A flat major of 1821, dedicated to Zuni, is his earliest surviving musical manuscript. In 1817, the Saxon Palace was requisitioned by Warsaw's Russian governor for military use, and the Warsaw Lyceum was re-established in the Kazimierz Palace. which is today the Rectorate of Warsaw University. Frederick and his family moved to a building which still survives, which was adjacent to the palace. During that period, Frederick was sometimes invited to the Belvedere Palace as a playmate to the son of the ruler of the Russian Poland, Grand Duke Constantine, played piano for the Duke and composed a march for him. Julian Nienkiewicz, in his dramatic eclogue Nats Przybiki Discourses 1818, attested to little Chopin's popularity. From September 1823 to 1826, Chopin attended the Warsaw Lyceum, where he received organ lessons from Czech musician Wilhelm Werfel during his first year. In autumn of 1826, he began a 3-year course under the Silesian composer Josef Elsner at the Warsaw Conservatory, studying music theory, figured bass and composition, and throughout that period he continued to compose and to give recitals in concerts and salons in Warsaw. He was engaged by the inventors of the mechanical organ, the Eolo-Melodicon, and on that particular instrument he performed his own improvisation and part of a concerto by Moscheles in May 1825. The success of that concert led to an invitation to give a similar recital on the instrument before Tsar Alexander I, who was visiting Warsaw at the time, and the Tsar presented him with a diamond ring. At a subsequent concert on the instrument, Chopin performed his Rondo Op. No. 1, and this was the first of his works to be commercially published and earned him his mention in the foreign press when the Leipzig Allgemeine Musikalische Zeitung praised his wealth of musical ideas. During 1824 to 28, Chopin spent his vacations away from Warsaw, he spent time at Sarfania, where he was a guest of Dominik Ziewanowski, the father of a schoolmate, and there he encountered Polish rural folk music, and his letters home from Sarfania, to which he gave the title the Sarfania Courier, written in a very modern and lively Polish, amused his family with their spoofing of the Warsaw newspapers and demonstrated his literary gift. In 1827, soon after the death of his younger sister Emilia, the family moved from Warsaw University building to lodgings just across the street from the university, in the south annex of Krasinski Palace on Krakowski Przedmieście. I apologise for my utter abysmal pronunciation of all these Polish words, where Chopin lived until he left Warsaw in 1830, and that is where his parents continued running their boarding house for male students. The Chopin family parlour became a museum in the 20th century, so that's where that took place. In 1829, the artist Ambrosi Mierozwecki executed a set of portraits of the Chopin family members, including the first known portrait of Chopin himself. The four boarders at his parents' apartment became Chopin's intimates: Titus Wojciechowski, Jan Nepomuchin, Leblocki, Jan Matuszynski, and Julian Fontana, the latter two of which would become part of his Paris New. He was friendly with members of Warsaw's young artistic and intellectual world, including Fontana, Joseph Bogdan Zaleski, and Stefan Witwicki, and he was also attracted to the singing student Konstancja Gladkowska, who we have heard mention of. In letters to Wojciechowski, he indicated which of his works, and even which of their passages, were influenced by his fascination with her. His letter of 15th May 1830 revealed the slow movement of his Piano Concerto No. 1 in E minor was secretly dedicated to her, with the quote, "It should be like dreaming in beautiful springtime by moonlight." His final conservatory report, July 1829, read, "Chopin F, third-year student, exceptional talent, musical genius." In 1828, September 1828, Chopin, while still a student, visited Berlin with a family friend, zoologist Felix Jarocki, enjoying operas directed by Spontini, and attending concerts by Zalta, Mendelssohn, and other celebrities. On a return trip to Berlin in 1829, he was a guest of Prince Antoni Radziwiłł, I think, who was the governor of the Grand Duchy of Posen, who himself was also an accomplished composer and aspiring cellist. For the prince and his pianist daughter Wanda, Frederick Chopin composed his Introduction and Polonaise Brillante in C major for cello and piano, Op. 3. Back in Warsaw that year, Chopin heard Niccolò Paganini play the violin and composed a set of variations, the Souvenir de Paganini, and it may have been this experience which encouraged him to commence writing his first etudes, exploring his capacities of his own instrument. On 11th of August, 3 weeks after completing his studies at the Warsaw Conservatory, he made his debut in Vienna. He gave 2 piano concerts and received many favourable reviews, in addition to some commenting, in Chopin's own words, that he was too delicate for those accustomed to the piano bashing of local artists. In one of those concerts, he premiered his variations of La Si darem la mano, Op. 2, variations on a duet from Mozart's opera Don Giovanni, for piano and orchestra. He returned to Warsaw in September 1859, where he premiered his Piano Concerto No. 2 in F minor, Op. 21, on 17th of March 1830. Chopin's success as a composer and performer opened the door to Western Europe for him, and on 2nd of November 1830 he set out, in the words of Władysław Jastrzębski, into the wide world with no very clearly defined aim forever. With Wojciechowski, he headed for Austria again, intending to go on to Italy. Later that month, in Warsaw, the November 1830 uprising broke out, and Wojciechowski returned to Poland to enlist. And Chopin was then left alone in Vienna, and he was nostalgic for his homeland and wrote to a friend, "I cursed the moment of my departure." When in September 1831 he learned, while travelling from Vienna to Paris, that the uprising had been crushed, he expressed his anguish in the pages of his private journal. "O God, you are there, and yet you do not take vengeance." Jastrzębski ascribes to these events the composer's maturing into an inspired national bard, who intuited the past, present and future of his native Poland. And obviously that is also a very important moment that has been brought up numerous times throughout Eternal Sonata. We then have his arrival in Paris in late September 1831, and obviously he would never return to Poland, thus becoming one of the many expatriates of the Polish Great Emigration. In France he used the French versions of his given names, and after receiving French citizenship in 1835, he travelled under a French passport. That's when he became Frédéric François Chopin. However, Chopin did remain close to his fellow Poles in exile as friends and confidants, and he never felt truly comfortable speaking French. Chopin's biographer Adam Zamoyski writes that he never considered himself to be French, despite his father's French origins, and always saw himself as a Pole. In Paris, Chopin encountered artists and other distinguished figures and found many opportunities to exercise his talents and achieve celebrity. During his years in Paris, he was to become acquainted with, among many others, Hector Berlioz, Franz Liszt, Ferdinand Hiller, Heinrich Heine, Eugene Delacroix, and Alfred de Vigny. Chopin was also acquainted with the poet Adam Mickiewicz, principal of the Polish Literary Society, some of whose verses he set as songs. 2 Polish friends in Paris were also to play an important role in Chopin's life there. His fellow student at the Warsaw Conservatory, Julian Fontana, had originally tried unsuccessfully to establish himself in England. Fontana was to become, in the words of Michalowski and Samson, Chopin's general factotum and copyist. Albert Grismala, who in Paris became a wealthy financier and society figure, often acted as Chopin's advisor, and gradually began to fill the role of elderly brother in his life. At the end of 1831, Chopin received the first major endorsement from an outstanding contemporary when Robert Schumann, reviewing the Op. 2 variations in the Allgemeine Musikalische Zeitung, his first published article on music, declared, "Hats off, gentlemen, a genius!" On 26th of February 1832, Chopin gave a debut Paris concert at the Salle Pleyel, I think, which drew universal admiration. The critic François-Joseph Petit wrote in the Revue et Gazette Musicale, "Here is a young man who, taking no model, has found, if not a complete renewal of piano music, an abundance of original ideas of a kind to be found nowhere else." After this concert, Chopin realised that his essentially intimate keyboard technique was not optimal for large concert spaces. Later that year, he was introduced to the wealthy Rothschild banking family, whose patronage also opened doors for him to other private salons, social gatherings of the aristocracy and artistic and literary elite. By the end of 1832, Chopin had established himself among the Parisian musical elite, and had earned the respect of his peers, such as Hiller, Liszt and Berlioz. He no longer depended financially upon his father, and in the winter of 1832, he began earning a handsome income from publishing his works, and teaching piano to affluent students from all over Europe. This freed him from the strains of public concert giving, which he disliked, really. Chopin seldomly performed publicly in Paris. In later years, he generally gave a single annual concert at the Salle Pleyel, a venue that seated 300. He played more frequently at salons, but preferred playing in his own Paris apartment for small groups of friends. Musicologist Arthur Headley has observed that as a pianist, Chopin was unique in acquiring a reputation of the highest order on the basis of a minimum of public appearances, few more than 30 in the course of his lifetime. The list of musicians who took part in some of his concerts provides an indication of the richness of Parisian artistic life during this period. Examples include a concert on the 23rd of March 1833 in which Chopin, Liszt and Hiller performed on pianos a concerto by J.S. Bach for 3 keyboards, and then on 3rd of March 1838 a concert in which Chopin, his pupil Adolphe Gutmann, Charles Valentin Alcan and Alcan's teacher Joseph Zimmermann performed Alcan's arrangement for 8 hands of 2 movements from Beethoven's 7th Symphony. Chopin was involved in the composition of Liszt's Hexameron. He wrote the 6th and final variation on Bellini's theme. Chopin's music soon found success with publishers, and in 1833 he contracted with Maurice Schlesinger, who arranged for it to be published not only in France, but through his family connections also in Germany and in England. In the spring of 1834, Chopin attended the Lower Rhenish Music Festival in Aix-la-Chapelle with Hiller, and it was there that Chopin met Felix Mendelssohn. After the festival, the 3 visited Düsseldorf, where Mendelssohn had been appointed musical director. They spent what Mendelssohn described as a very agreeable day, playing and discussing music at piano, and met Friedrich Wilhelm Schadow, director of the Academy of Arts, and some of his eminent pupils such as Lessing, Bendemann, Hildebrandt and Sohn. In 1835, Chopin went to Carlsbad, where he spent some time with his parents, the last time he would see them, and on his way back to Paris he met old friends from Warsaw, the Wodzinskis. He'd made the acquaintance of their daughter Maria in Poland 5 years earlier, when she was 11. The meeting prompted him to stay for 2 weeks in Dresden, when he had previously intended to return to Paris via Leipzig. The 16-year-old girl's portrait of the composer is considered, along with Delacroix's, as among Chopin's best likenesses. In October he finally reached Leipzig, where he met Schumann, Clara Wieck and Mendelssohn, who organised for him a performance of his own oratorio, St. Paul, and who considered him a perfect musician. In July 1836, Chopin travelled to Marienbad and Dresden to be with the Wodzinski family, and in September he proposed to Maria, whose mother, Countess Wodzinska, approved in principle. Chopin went on to Leipzig, where he presented Schumann with his G minor ballad. At the end of 1836, he sent Maria an album in which his sister Ludwika had inscribed 7 of his songs, and his 1835 Nocturne in C-sharp minor, Op. 27, No. 1. The anodyne thanks he received from Maria proved to be the last letter he was to have from her. Although it isn't known exactly when Chopin first met Liszt after arriving in Paris, on 12th of December 1831 he mentioned in a letter to his friend Wojciechowski that I have met Rossini, Cherubini, Baillot, etc., also Kalkbrenner. You would not believe how curious I was about Herz, Liszt, Hiller, etc. Liszt was in attendance at Chopin's Parisian debut in 1832, which led him to remark, "The most vigorous applause seemed not to suffice to our enthusiasm in the presence of this talented musician, who revealed a new phase of poetic sentiment combined with such happy innovation in the form of his art." Two became friends, and for many years lived in close proximity in Paris. They performed together on 7 occasions between 1833 and 1841, and although the two displayed great respect and admiration for each other, their friendship was uneasy and had some qualities of a love-hate relationship. Harold C. Schonberg believes that Chopin displayed a tinge of jealousy and spite towards Liszt's virtuosity on the piano, and others have also argued that he had become enchanted with Liszt's theatricality, showmanship and success. Liszt was the dedicatee of Chopin's Op. 10 Etudes, and his performance of them prompted the composer to write to Hiller, "I should like to rob him of the way he plays my studies." However, Chopin expressed annoyance in 1843 when Liszt performed one of his nocturnes, with the addition of numerous intricate embellishments, for which Chopin remarked that he should play the music as written or not play it at all. It was an apology. Most biographers of Chopin state that after this the two had little to do with each other, although in his letters dated as late as 1848, he still referred to him as my friend Liszt. Some commentators point to events in the two men's romantic lives which led to a rift between them. There are claims that Liszt had displayed jealousy of his mistress Marie Dajol's obsession with Chopin, while others believe that Chopin had become concerned about Liszt's growing relationship with George Sand. So, we've had mention of George Sand before in Raindrops and a few other bits, but obviously this is where she comes into the narrative of Chopin's life. In 1836, at a party hosted by Marie Dajol, Chopin met the French author George Sand. She was short, dark, big-eyed, and a cigar smoker, and she initially repelled Chopin, who remarked, "What an unattractive person La Sand is. Is she really a woman?" However, by early 1837, Maria Wadzinska's mother had made it clear to Chopin in correspondence that a marriage with her daughter was unlikely to proceed. It's thought that she was influenced by his poor health and possibly also by rumours about his associations with women such as Dajol and Sand. Chopin finally placed the letters from Maria and her mother in a package on which he wrote in Polish, "My tragedy." Sand, in a letter to Grzymala of June 1838, admitted strong feelings for the composer and debated whether to abandon a current affair in order to begin a relationship with Chopin. She asked Grzymala to assess Chopin's relationship with Maria Wadzinska, without realising that the affair, at least from Maria's side, was over. In June 1837, Chopin visited London incognito in the company of the piano manufacturer Camille Pleyel, where he played at a musical soirée at the house of English piano maker James Broadway. On his return to Paris, his association with Sand began in earnest, and by the end of June 1838 they had become lovers.
You better pull your head in.
Sand, who was 6 years older than the composer, and who had had a series of lovers, wrote at the time, "I must say I was confused and amazed at the effect this little creature had on me. I have still not recovered from my astonishment, and if I were a power person, I should be feeling humiliated at having been carried away." The two spent a miserable winter on Mallorca, where together with Sand's two children they journeyed in the hope of improving the health of Chopin and that of Sand's 15-year-old son Maurice, and also to escape threats of Sand's former lover, Félicien Malfy. After discovering that the couple were not married, the deeply traditional Catholic people of Mallorca became inhospitable, making accommodation difficult to find. This compelled the group to take lodgings in a former Carthusian monastery in Valdemosa, which gave little shelter from cold winter weather, a story that we have heard. On 3rd of December, Chopin complained about his bad health and the incompetence of the doctors in Mallorca. 3 doctors have visited me. The first said I was dead, the second said I was dying, and the third said I was about to die. He also had problems having his Pleyel's piano sent to him. It finally arrived from Paris in December. Chopin wrote to Pleyel in January 1839, "I'm sending you my preludes, Op. 28. I finished them on your little piano, which arrived in the best possible condition in spite of the sea, the bad weather and the Park customs." Chopin was also able to undertake work on his Ballade No. 2, Op. 38, 2 Polonaises, Op. 40, and the Scherzo No. 3, Op. 39. Although this period had been productive, the bad weather had such a detrimental effect on Chopin's health that Sand determined to leave the island. To avoid further customs duties, Sand sold the piano to a local French couple, Knuts. The group first travelled to Barcelona, then to Marseille, where they stayed for a few months while Chopin convalesced. In May 1839, they headed for the summer to Sand's estate at Nohant, where they spent most summers until 1846. In autumn, they returned to Paris, where Chopin's apartment at 5 Rue Tronchet was close to Sand's rented accommodation at the Rue Pigalle. He frequently visited Sand in the evenings, but both retained some independence. In 1842, he and Sand moved to the Square d'Orléans, living in adjacent buildings. At the funeral of the tenor Adolphe Nourry in Paris in 1839, Chopin made a rare appearance at the organ, playing a transcription of Franz Schubert's Ede de Gestern. On 26th July 1840, Chopin and Sand were present at the dress rehearsal of Berlioz's Grande Symphonie Funèbre et Triomphale, composed to commemorate the 10th anniversary of the July Revolution. Chopin was reportedly unimpressed with the composition. During the summers at Nohant, particularly between 1839 to 43, Chopin found quite productive days during which he composed many works. And yes, and then his decline began. From 1842 onwards, he showed signs of serious illness. After a solo recital in Paris on 21st February 1842, he wrote to Grismala, "I have to lie in bed all day long, my mouth and tonsils are aching so much." He was forced by illness to decline a written invitation from Alcon to participate in a repeat performance of the Beethoven 7th Symphony arrangement at Erard's on 1st March 1843. And late in 1844, when Charles Halley visited Chopin, he found him hardly able to move, bent like a half-open penknife, and evidently in great pain, although his spirits returned when he started to play the piano for his visitor, and his health continued to deteriorate, particularly from this time onwards. Modern research suggests that apart from any other illnesses, he may have also suffered from temporal lobe epilepsy. Chopin's relations with Sand were soured in 1846 by problems involving her daughter Solange and Solange's fiancé. The composer frequently took Solange's sides in quarrels with her mother, and he also faced jealousy from Sand's son Maurice. Chopin was utterly indifferent to Sand's radical political pursuits, while Sand looked on his society friends with disdain. As the composer's illness progressed, Sand had become less of a lover and more of a nurse to Chopin, whom she called her third child. In letters to the third party, she vented her impatience, referring to him as a child, a little angel, a sufferer, and a beloved little corpse. In 1847, Sand published her novel Lucrezia Floriani, whose main characters, a rich actress and a prince in weak health, could be interpreted as Sand and Chopin, and the story was uncomplimentary to Chopin, who could not have missed the allusions, as he helped Sand correct the prince's galleys. In 1847, he did not visit Nohant, and he quietly ended their 10-year relationship following an angry correspondence which, in Sand's words, made a strange conclusion to 9 years of exclusive friendship. The two would never meet again. Chopin's output as a composer throughout the period declined in quantity year by year, whereas in 1841 he had written a dozen works, only 6 were written in 1842 and 6 shorter pieces in 1843. In 1844 he wrote only the AP 58 Sonata. 1845 saw the completion of 3 mazurkas. Although these works were more refined than many of his earlier compositions, Zamoyski concludes that his powers of concentration were failing and his inspiration was beset by anguish, both emotional and intellectual. Chopin's public popularity as a virtuoso began to wane as did the number of his pupils, and this, together with political strife and instability at the time, caused him to struggle financially. In February 1848, he gave his last Paris concert. In April, during the Revolution of 1848 in Paris, he left for London, where he performed at several concerts and at numerous receptions in great houses. This tour was suggested to him by a Scottish pupil, Jane Stirling, and her elder sister, and Stirling made all of the logistical arrangements and much of the necessary funding. In London lodgings that Chopin took, there was at Dover Street, and his first engagement on the 15th of May at Stratford House, the audience included Queen Victoria and Prince Albert. And the Prince, who was himself a talented musician, moved close to the keyboard to view Chopin's technique. Multiple other concerts occurred, and in the late summer he was invited by Jane Stirling to visit Scotland, where he stayed at Calder House near Edinburgh. And obviously Jane Stirling clearly had a notion of going beyond mere friendship, and Chopin was obliged to make it clear to her that this could not be so. And Chopin then made his last public appearance on a concert platform at London's Guildhall on 16th of November 1848, and in a final patriotic gesture, he played for the benefit of Polish refugees. By this time he was seriously ill, weighing under 99 pounds, and his doctors were aware that his sickness was at a terminal stage. At the end of November, Chopin returned to Paris. He passed the winter in unremitting illness, but gave occasional lessons and was visited by friends including Delacroix and Franchomme. Occasionally he played or accompanied the singing of Delphina Potocka for his friends. During the summer of 1849, his friends found him in an apartment in Chaillot, out of the centre of the city. for which the rent was secretly subsidised by an admirer, Princess Obrazkov. Here in June 1849 he was visited by Jenny Lind. And now we reach the end of Chopin's life in his story. With his health further deteriorating, Chopin desired to have a family member with him. In June 1849 his sister Ludwika came to Paris with her husband and daughter, and in September, supported by a loan from Jane Stirling, he took an apartment at Place Vendôme 12. After 15th of October, when his condition took a marked turn for the worst, only a handful of his closest friends remained with him, although Viardot remarked sardonically that all the Grand Parisian ladies considered it de rigueur to faint in his room. Some of his friends provided music at his request, among them Potka sang and Franchomme played the cello. Chopin requested that his body be opened after death for fear of being buried alive, and his heart returned to Warsaw, where it rests at the Church of the Holy Cross. He also bequeathed his unfinished notes on a piano tuition method, Project de Méthode, to Alcan for completion. On 17th of October, after midnight, the physician leaned over him and asked whether he was suffering greatly. No longer, he replied. He died a few minutes before 2 o'clock in the morning. Those present at the deathbed appear to have included his sister Ludwika, Princess Marcelina Czartoryska, son's daughter Solange, and his close friend Thomas Albrecht. Later that morning, Solange's husband Clesinger made Chopin's death mask in a cast of his left hand. Chopin's disease and the cause of his death has since been a matter of discussion. His death certificate gave the cause as tuberculosis, and his physician Jean Puvelier was then the leading French authority on this disease. Other possibilities have been advanced, including cystic fibrosis, cirrhosis, and alpha-1 antitrypsin deficiency. However, the attribution of tuberculosis as principal cause of his death has not been disproved. Permission for DNA testing, which could put the matter to rest, has been denied by the Polish government. The funeral, held at the Church of Madeleine in Paris, was delayed almost 2 weeks until 13th of October. Entrance was restricted to ticket holders, as many people were expected to attend. Over 3,000 people arrived without invitations from as far as London, Berlin and Vienna and were excluded. Mozart's Requiem was sung at the funeral. The soloists were the soprano Jean-Anne Casselan, the mezzo-soprano Pauline Viardot, the tenor Alexis Dupont, and the bass Luigi Leblanche. Chopin's preludes number 4 in E minor and number 6 in B minor were also played. The organist at the funeral was Louis Lefebvre-Welly. The funeral procession to Père Lachaise Cemetery, which included Chopin's sister Ludwika, was led by the aged Prince Adam Czartoryski. Pallbearers included Delacroix, Franchomme, and Camille Pleyel. At the graveside, the funeral march from Chopin's Piano Sonata No. 2 was played in Reber's instrumentation. Chopin's tombstone, featuring the music Euterpe, weeping over a broken lyre, was designed and sculpted by Clesinger. The expenses of the funeral and monument, amounting to 5,000 francs, were recovered by Jane Stirling, who also paid for the return of the composer's sister Ludwika to Warsaw. Ludwika took Chopin's heart in an urn preserved in alcohol back to Poland in 1850. She also took a collection of 200 letters from Sand to Chopin. After 1851, these were returned to Sand, who seems to have destroyed them. And that marks the end of the story of Chopin's life. And as we sort of get towards near-ish the end of Mount Rock, still got a ways to go, there are other things that I will certainly talk about with regards to Frédéric Francois Chopin. Obviously, that entire massive long description all came from the Wikipedia page, so whether some of it is quite accurate or not is up for debate, but it's all sourced to places, so you can probably argue that it's pretty accurate. And it's fascinating to look at Chopin's life all in one fell swoop, because you kind of get to see that obviously he was a brilliant pianist and composer who had a very unique style that got him much acclaim, but as he grew older, his propensity for getting ill soured so much for him and his life, and ultimately that ruined the one lasting relationship that he ever had, and ultimately his end and death is incredibly tragic. And I think that makes me appreciate him all the more, actually, because he lived for his music, and he loved it until the day he died, and that's quite beautiful.
Alright, let's keep moving forward.
And thankfully, that has got me through that stretch of so many battles.
Good.
Thank you, Wikipedia, you are a godsend. And now we are, I think, just going to go off the end of the screen here, because there's some goodies awaiting us before we can complete the dungeon. Yeah, there's this treasure chest right here, and once we've got the Sunbringer, it's time to head forward to finish off Mount Rock.